দেখি আমার ইউটিউবে আসছে কিনা, দাঁড়াও, আসে না এখন, দুই ছুটি দাঁড়াও, ওয়ান ওয়াচিং, হ্যাঁ, ইন্নালিল্লাহ। We have little problem, with the link. So we have created new YouTube link. I just send it to the 4 WhatsApp group. Would you mind to share in your Facebook, please? So those people wanted to join, they cannot use with that link. You know what happens? We have some problem. So we created the new link. But the other link didn't work, okay? So we created a new link. If you don't mind, can you please share with your friends and colleagues the new links, please? Assalamu alaikum and very good evening. I'm really sorry we had problem with the earlier link, the YouTube link. So I had to create a new link and share it. So it could be unfortunate. Many people wouldn't be able to join, I think, today's session. Unless they go to my YouTube channel, they can join. So you'll wait for a while for some other people to join, okay? Just give me a few minutes. All right, I think I have to slowly start off. I'm really sorry for the technical problem that we have. Somehow, the earlier YouTube link did not work, so I had to create the new link, and I have shared with my WhatsApp groups. Hopefully, um, those participants are connected with me through my webinar groups. They would be able to attend, but unfortunately, those people are not connected in my webinar groups. They may not be able to join my session today. Okay, so my humble request is those of you who are joining me now, if you don't mind, can you please share the session in your Facebook so that people can join with that link. You can just click on share and post it in the Facebook that the session is on now. All right, thank you very much. Let me start, Bismarck. Chapter 4, chapter 4 and chapter 5. These two chapters actually, the chapters that give you the PhD degree, okay, that give you the PhD degree. Chapter 1, 2, 3, you can take many things from people. Basically, you read papers and then you try to understand the research problem. You extract variables, look at underpinning theories, you design questionnaires, you decide on research design, research approach. Everything could be based on your review of previous literature. But chapter 4 is basically all about your work. Chapter 5 is your work, okay? So your PhD is basically given based on chapter 4 and chapter 5. Myself, when I go as examiner in the final Viva Voce session, I personally wouldn't ask a lot of questions on chapter 1 to 3. No, chapter 1 a bit, I'll make sure the methodology is right. But my more focus would be on chapter 4 and chapter 5, because that is your own chapters that gives you the PhD degree. As I see in the social media, when I posted that I'll be on live on with chapter 4, I see the enthusiasm among the PhD scholars are not as many as the kind of feedback that we got when we talk about chapter 3, chapter 1. Chapter 3 and chapter 1 seems to be the most difficult one, based on the feedback that I gave to students. Possibly because many students are not yet in chapter 4, and they may not understand that this chapter could be quite delicate, quite difficult. And this is the chapter that make you, this is a life and death question, chapter 4. Because when you collect data, you follow all the procedures to run the data. And then when you have the findings with you and you see that your hypotheses are not accepted, most of them are rejected, and your findings are totally different from previous researches conducted worldwide, of course, you will run into trouble. You will have sleepless nights. Okay, that is chapter 4. And to share my experience before I go into the slides, when I finished writing the whole draft, I passed my thesis to an Australian professor. I said, Prof, can you go through and review it and give me some feedback? You know what he says? When I went to see him to get feedback, he said, your chapter 1 to 3 is fine, but your chapter 4 sucks. That's the language he used, he used that language. He said, your chapter 4 sucks. You know why? Because being me as a quantitative person, when I got the data, I know exactly what tests to be run and all that. So I focused too much on the statistical part, forgetting the other important elements, the sequence of presentation, the flow, of ideas, because we have to go with research question that I have in chapter 1. And that follow I got to that flow that I got to follow in chapter 4 while I do my presentation of ideas in chapter 4, the findings that I have. And number 2, language even. The Australian professor told me your chapter 1 to 3 looks to be fine, but chapter 4, even your language even sucks. The language even is too bad, because we are having a lot of tables, a lot of figures, and we are talking about what we have in the table and figure, and we walk down with that. And we forget some important elements of chapter 4, okay? Chapter 4. Even when I go as an external examiner, in many cases, I found out that the caption of the tables and figures are not right. The caption given in a table which is supposed to be in another table, that sort of things are there. Table sequence is not right. The graph sequence is not right. Those sort of simple, careless mistakes would be there in chapter 4, because you will be you will be too busy with looking into the findings that we have and worrying about the hypothesis testing, the outputs that we have. Okay. So that the introduction for today, chapter 4. That is your chapter. Chapter 1 to 3, not necessarily yours. You have taken many of things from people and you have given the citation and all that. But chapter 4 is definitely fully yours. based on the data you have, and you run with the statistical programs and all that. Chapter 4 is completely yours. Chapter 5 even more yours. Okay, so with that introduction, let me share the slide, and then I will start. Okay, share screen. Give me a minute. So let me see whether it is visible in the YouTube channel first. It takes some time. Okay, it is visible. All right, I can start now. So this is my fourth session, right, on writing and structuring thesis or dissertation. In my first session, I talked about the thesis, definition of thesis and dissertation, so I do not want to repeat on that. All right. So today we are going into this chapter 4, data analysis and findings. Data analysis and findings, that we are going to look at. Now, when it comes to chapter 4, there are two groups of academics. One group of academics, they feel that chapter 4 should be confined into findings only, meaning that you just talk about your data, you present the data, and you present the findings. All right. The other group, they feel no. In chapter 4, you present your data findings as well as the discussion on the findings. All right. Even some universities I have seen, findings is one chapter, then discussion is another chapter, and finally you have another conclusion, a different chapter. All right. Personally, I belong to the first group of people. All right, first group of academic. I believe that chapter 2 should contain the findings only, data analysis and findings. All right, and then the discussion should be included in chapter 5, and then after that we make a conclusion. All right, so my presentation will follow that flow. So chapter 4, we will be talking about data analysis and findings. That's what I'm going to do. Okay, so this is what I said. Chapter 4 with the data analysis and findings. Now, please remember, different university has different guidelines. So make sure you read properly the guidelines given by the university where you enroll for PhD, and then you follow the guidelines. If your university guidelines says chapter 4 is findings and discussion, please proceed with that. Your university says no, findings in chapter 4, discussion, conclusion, chapter 5 is fine. If your university says no, findings is chapter 4, discussion, chapter 5, conclusion, chapter 6, please proceed with that. Do not tell your supervisor, no, actually I attended the YouTube session with Prof. Aminul and he said, no, it should be like that. Please don't do that. All right. Follow your university regulations, the guidelines given. All right. This is basically a general outline of chapter 4. You start with introduction. As you remember, this is basically one piece of work. Chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or whatever the number of chapters you have. This all chapter belong to one piece of thesis or dissertation. All right, that's one piece of work. Therefore, there must be a following up, carrying on. Okay, so we add up chapter 3, and then at the end, you will say that next chapter present data analysis and findings. And when you start chapter 4, you have to carry forward chapter 3, right? You have to say that, you know, the earlier chapter you talked about this, and this chapter is going to present this. So this introduction, you're going to say this chapter basically presenting the data, the analysis and interpretation of data, then followed on, okay? The presentation of findings, which is the most important, right? Elements in chapter 4. So let me proceed then, okay? And also to remind you, those of you who are with me now, stay on until the end, because towards the end, I'm going to give you a suggested outline for this chapter if you're using Smart PLS, suggested outlines if you are using NVivo, or suggested outline for chapter 4 if you are using Stata. Those of you do panel data analysis. Okay, so I have sample for it for you. I'll show you, and later, of course, I will share this slide with you. Okay. Now, this chapter, we present the data, presentation of data. All right. So we present the data in the form of table, it could be in the form of textual, or could be even graphical. It all depends on the kind of the study, the nature of the study that you have. Okay, for some kind of study, the table could be enough. Some kind of study you may need table, you need the graph, you may need figures also. Okay, and of course the textual would be definitely there. Okay, so these are the ways we can present the data. We are talking about presenting the data. Okay, the analysis of data and interpretation of data. We present findings in form of tables, figures, charts, and other illustrations as needed in terms of research question and hypothesis tested. And then analyze in depth to give meaning to the data presented in the table. That would be in the case of for many students, as I said here, that avoid table reading. Student will replicate whatever you have in the table, you just write in the text. That's what is not wanted. You have to present what is in the table, present in a meaningful way, so that people can understand what is actually there. Because in the table is basically in the quantitative data, and then you are putting the textual format, but do not translate exactly what is in the table, replicate there. Okay, you may have to highlight the important ones. There are certain information in the table are very important ones, certain are less important. Some data could not be relevant at all. It's relevant, but not that important. So we have to understand that which one to highlight and focus. Okay, so later I'll give you some example on it. Discuss your findings in terms of what the data actually means in terms of each segment and cell of data gathered. Say, for example, you have gender, male and female. If you have more male or more female, then you must have some kind of reasoning there, right? Say, for example, you're talking about the race, like in Malaysia, you have three main races and some other races. So the representation of the races when you collect data has to be there, so there's meaning there, which got to be carefully discussed, okay? Not discussed, carefully presented and interpreted, okay? And then later we'll have some kind of conclusion in every section as concretely as possible in terms of each segment or cell of data, all right? Because those are connected with research questions and hypothesis. As I go along, it will be more clear, okay? Just follow on. Just follow me, okay? Sorry. This is the data presentation, okay? Earlier we said presentation of data, now it's in data presentation, okay? So this data presentation section introduces the chapter by indicating the order of presentation. So you will say that how you're going to present the data, right? It summarizes background information of the respondents, then data collected through literature, survey, questionnaire, interview, or observation, and you have to prove the data is sufficient, the data is valid and accurate, right? So we have number of ways are testing and proving that your data is sufficient, valid, and accurate, all right? So it depends on what kind of software you are using. Different software will have different mechanism to test all that, okay? But you have to prove that your data is sufficient, is adequate, is valid, and is accurate. That's the most important one. Because if data quality is not proven, then the output definitely not acceptable, okay? And it follows the sequence of questions raised, okay? So the data adequately answer the research questions, all right? Of course, when you test hypothesis, all that, you'll have more, answers to the questions, but even during the data presentation, some indirect answers of the questions could be there, all right? And as I said, the table, graphs, and figures are appropriately presented. Okay, let me remind you, when you number the table, how do you number? In chapter 4, the first table would be 4.1, second table would be 4.2, okay? If graph, then also graph 4.1 and 4.2. Figure also 4.1, 4.2. So every chapter start like that. If you have any table in chapter 3, start with 3.1. Please remember to follow that, okay? And I said that the text only highlight of the table, right? You see, basically we're highlighting certain information in the textual description. Okay, so you are not going to replicate whatever you have table and everything you explain, not necessarily. Okay, I do not want to make this session too long, and that's why I have decided not to present a sample of table and figures and graphs, because these are easily understood by everyone. Okay. In certain cases, you need to have appropriate subheadings, okay, to facilitate reader, okay, to understand the text, and also, non-evaluative analysis of data. You are presenting in a way That is data presentation. You're not evaluating, for certain cases. All right. This one is not shown. Okay. Fine now. The next important one you have to remember that the presentation should be very clear and scholarly done, because it is a PhD thesis. And we talk about that. And analysis refers to skill of reader or researcher to describe, delineate, all right, similarities and differences, highlighting the significant findings of data, ability to extract information messages out of the presentation of data. Those has to be there. That makes you that you are a mature researcher, okay, and you have done your work. It's not somebody has done it and you are just reading. It's not like that, okay. So the presentation has to be done in a way it shows like this is your work and really you have done it, okay. And interpretation is the explanation or suggestion inferred from the data, all right, and their implication, but not conclusion. You're just presenting data, so you're just inferring the possible reasons. Say, for example, you have distributed a 1,000 questionnaire, and you got back 300, and among 300, somehow the male become like 70% and 30% female. So that is the response rate you did. What can you do? But when you distributed 50% to male and 50% to female. So you have to have some kind of interpretation, explanation, and possible impact on your findings got to be inferred. Okay. Now, when it comes to analysis of data, you have to stress only those important results, right? That gives information that could answer the problem raised. So when you are analyzing the data analysis follow what you have, set out in chapter 1. Chapter 1, you set up your story. The storyline is created. You have research problem, and then you have research questions and research objectives. So you are following the research questions, and there should be a unique, way of doing it. And that's what we call it logical sequence and good flow in presentation. All right. This is very important. All right. And everything that we do, you got to highlight the unique one. That is your contribution. All right. So you got to start highlighting from starting from data analysis. Okay. You have to be consistent and coherent in your approach as well as logical, okay, based on certain academic conventions. So there are academic way of presenting data, and you have to follow that way, all right? And that's the reason we will always advise you, go and see a real thesis, right? And see how the chapter 4 is presented. So we go through 2, 3, 4 theses and see how it is presented, then we follow. Because if you are doing smart PLAs and you're using SPSS, the presentation is different. If you're using data, the presentation of the analysis of data is totally different from smart PLS, as go on in vivo for qualitative or even atlastic qualitative analysis. Okay, so the presentation flow is totally different in qualitative versus quantitative, that you got to remember. Okay, analyze in depth to give meaning to the data presented to in the table. Okay, data presented in the table. So as I said earlier, you have to avoid the table reading. Okay. All right. Interpretation of data. We have to somehow make interconnection and relationship among the data. Okay. Check the indicators whether hypothesis supported or not supported. Link the presentation, the previous researches. Those will be in the discussion chapter. All right. But here basically just presenting. And then use parallel observation with contemporary evidence or events that give evidence to the presentation. Or presented in the introduction chapter. Okay, so you'll be always referring back to chapter 1 while you are doing a presentation chapter 4. Why? Because the storyline is created, the study setup is being done in chapter 1. Okay, so then we follow on to chapter 2 to extract more information to establish what we thought, and we set out in chapter 2. Okay, and then from chapter 3 we extracted the variables all there, then put it in the framework in chapter 3. So chapter 1 is the storyline, the background that you have to follow on. If you watch any movie, the first 15 minutes or 20 minutes or even sometimes goes 30 minutes, or in some movie even just 2-3 minutes, they will tell you certain background information that set out the storyline of that movie. And the whole movie will be revolving around that. Okay, so that is how we write a thesis. And I always say thesis is basically telling and selling a story, telling and selling your story. So you have a storyline. You are telling people and you are selling people. People got to understand and they got to buy it. They got to feel, no, it is a good work. Okay, so that's how it is. So if the storyline is created in chapter 1, it has to go on in every chapter. The chapter 4 especially, because you have the data you're interpreting. Here actually you are dramatizing, you are getting questions. Now here you see I have the answers. So indirectly you are telling people, look at it, I got the answers of the question that I said in chapter 1. Okay, now some other elements that I have earlier talked. I think this one also I will avoid for you. I'll keep it for your reading. Okay, the other formats. Okay, table and graphs are definitely good way to organize and arrange data so they can be easily understood. But again, remember that it has to make sense. Anything you put in a table got to make sense. If you are running SPSS, there are many data output there which are not useful, not redundant, not useful, right? They are redundant. So we have to design our own table. Please make sure you do not copy and paste the output. You can. PLS, of course, you can, but if you're using SPSS or even Stata, you cannot copy paste the output into chapter 4. Okay, so you got to be very careful. And table and graphs are related in the sense that information used in table are frequently also being used as a basis for graphs, right? But certain cases will prefer you to use only one. If table is enough, then you should not be using graph again, okay? But there are certain data, for example, like economic or financial data, finance data. We may need a table and may not be understandable, people may not understand. So in that case, we may use graph, or even we may use the figures, okay? So it's possible. But if you use a table and graph, you shouldn't be using a figure. Or if you use table and figure, you should not be using the graph or using the graph. Okay, so you got to be careful on that. And while you are designing the table, you have to make sure the format is very clear and simple. And even every decimal points and all that should be closely designed. Okay. For table, actually, you can have font size 10. If normally text is 12, the table could be 10. Okay. But again, you have to refer to your university guidelines that is given. Okay. So the university I have done on my PhD, the table font size was 10, but the text font size was 12. Well, that is what you have to follow it. Okay. Some university allow color one. Some university doesn't allow the color. Okay. So like the university I did my PhD, the color was not allowed. Even our university currently now, the color is not allowed. Okay. So you have to put black and white. Okay. Unless certain cases the color could be allowed, but again you have to refer to the guidelines given. Okay. The bar graphs could be an excellent way because it makes it like anybody look at it can understand. Okay. So bar graphs could be used to give overall idea or the trend of responses. Okay, so easily understood. It can be put in a graph, it can be put in a figure, but still graph could be better beside the table one. Okay, but again it depends on you. You may differ for what I said, right? You can differ for me. Okay, now some tips. Okay, some tips. The result section, basically the finding section, it contains all the data to support the hypothesis that was proposed in chapter section, right? Chapter 1. So it will follow the research question, and research question would be transformed into research hypothesis, right? So you should follow that sequence, okay? And he said it serves as a way to wave a coherent story and must communicate the findings to the reader in a logical and transparent manner. Okay, I think it's understood. I'm not going to explain. And then when it comes to table and all that, I've given some other suggestions here also for you. I will keep it for your own reading. Okay. Now, I have talked about graph, table, and figure. I will leave it to you now. You decide which one you'd like to take. Some cases you may use asterisk sign to show the importance. Even you can use the arrow sign in the table. Okay. Table label, that's what is very important. Table label should be very clear. The labeling has to be done very clearly. And also you have to follow the university guideline. Every university guideline, they will tell you exactly how a table should be labeled. Okay, and the table should be self-explanatory. Anybody look at the table should understand what kind of information you have there. Okay, uh, meaning that you should not have too many things in the table. Okay, textual description should summarize and highlight. I have mentioned earlier that you have to highlight the findings. You have to highlight the findings when you are going for textual description. Okay, cross-check references with figures and tables in the text. Sometime as examiner, when you go, we see what you have in the table and what you have written is different. Okay, what you have presented in a table or figure or graph, and when you started writing is totally different. And we have detected many times with many students. Okay, so you got to be very careful. You got to be very meticulous. Okay, and then any statistical analysis do, then you have to definitely infer some opinion, all right, whether it was really appropriate test to be done, and how it was done. It should be also described. Okay, describe specific trends or significant effects, similarity or construct, exception and limitations in your description of findings. Okay, all right. The common pitfalls that we see among the students: the same data presented in a figure and graph, and possibly in that same data, not necessarily necessary, right? And data presented in a table simply stated without describing the trend or making any comparison or highlighting the similarities or anomalies and all that. And usually, unusual trend in the data is ignored. All right. So if your data presents something totally different, then you got to be highlighting, all right, because that is something totally new in your research. All right. Now, let me show you some of the contents that we present in chapter 4. If you are using Stata, then this is a suggested content for chapter 4. Okay, so you start with introduction, then you are talking about data preliminaries, you are doing the data screening, testing and cleaning, you are continuing descriptive analysis, then you are talking about reserve panel root analysis. You decide on which stage you are going to use, then you proceed to make empirical findings, you are going for hypothesis testing, and you are going for summary of the chapter. Okay, but when it comes to smart PLAs, it bit longer. Okay, it could be a bit longer. So for example, this is an example of chapter 4 using smart PLAs. We start with introduction, analyzing the survey response, the response rate. You're talking profile of respondents. You're talking data coding and entering, and it continues. Okay, it continues, and you can see here. It continues. Okay, you have a measurement model, later you have an structural model, and if you are moderating and mediating, then all sort of things are there that could be very well presented in a logical manner with a good flow. Okay, and it continues. Okay, it continues. So if you are using PLAs, because it's a latest software and it has many additional features, so chapter 4 become longer. Okay, validation and internal consistency testing and testing of your hypothesis, all that. So presentation of chapter 4 could be longer if you are using smart PLAs. I'm also giving you an example in case any qualitative research students are here. When it comes to qualitative research, you will present your findings in a thematic way. So as you see the slide I'm putting here, basically you are following a theme like question 1, your question 2, and your question 3. These are the theme of your research. So you are following a thematic way of presenting your findings, presenting your findings. So that is totally different, right? This is totally different from quantitative, because you have to test the validity and internal consistency and all that before you start testing, and even because you got a lot of data, so you have to talk about data cleaning and all that, and also describing demographic profile, the response rate, all that could be longer compared to the qualitative study. So qualitative study goes on thematic way. All right, so it could be based on research question, or it could be based on theme and sub-theme. So this one depends on you and your supervisor, you have to discuss and agree on the way you are going to present your findings. It will be based on questions, because you may not have any hypothesis, right? Most of the time you don't have any hypothesis. Or you may follow a different way of going for theme 1 and theme 2, theme 3 and theme 4, depending on how did you how did you construct your questions for interview or focus group, all right? Or observation, say for example, all right? So now even you use NVivo or Atlas T, still you may go for thematic way of presenting your findings, okay? So at the end of chapter 4, you should have a summary. So summary should be an excellent piece of work, because you will be highlighting the key findings. Remember, this is your own chapters, and you are going to highlight exactly what is new here, because at the end of the day, chapter 5, you have to show that you are contributing to the body of knowledge, new knowledge contribution there, or new methodological contribution there, or some policy recommendations for industry or the other stakeholders. At the end, if it's quantitative research, then you may have a small summary table presenting the hypothesis and whether accepted or rejected, and on what basis accepted or rejected. That table could be very nice, summarizing chapter 4. And at the end, you have to say the following chapter, chapter 5. The thesis, you will do the discussion and concluding the thesis, okay? If you are doing a qualitative research, then the summary, you have to highlight what did you find which is a bit different or totally different from the other researchers. So you got to highlight your special findings and put that in the summary. And then you carry on to chapter 5, okay? Now with that, I would like to end today's presentation, and I would be open for question and answers. Okay, for today's session, I didn't want to put a lot of slides. I thought rather, because different university have different structure and guidelines for chapter 4, so I do not want to make any controversial presentation and put him in trouble. Okay, so I am giving a more general guideline on how to write chapter 4, and I'll be open for question and answer sessions. All right. So let me go back to the Steam here, then stop presentation, and then I will start getting questions from you, okay? All right, so let me bring those people have joined me on the stage, and then those of you are with me now, you can ask questions. You can ask direct question now. So I will open up the session for you. Those of you who are on the stage with me on the screen, you may switch on your video camera and unmute yourself before you speak. So who would like to ask first before I go to anyone from those of you who have joined me?
Yes, Prof.
Okay, Charles, yes.
Yes. Thank you for your nice insight on the 4th chapter. I would like to ask, during data presentation and the data presentation and analysis, do we involve this stage with linking with either conceptual framework and with conceptual framework? Is that place where we are supposed to link with the conceptual framework?
Yes, because basically in chapter 1, you have research problem, and then you convert them into few research questions, right? And then you do literature review. Those research questions, you use the term as parameters to look for literature, and then you develop a theoretical conceptual framework. So while you are analyzing the data, presenting the findings, definitely you have to link with your conceptual framework, because when you are linking it to research problem, research questions, definitely you are linking with the framework that you have developed. Am I right?
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Haider has joined me from Iraq. If you have any comments or any suggestions for students for chapter 4,
Thank you very much, Prof. You have covered everything, actually. You
all
have
right.
covered every aspect of writing chapter 4. And I have nothing more to add upon what you have said. But from my experience and my advice to the research students, new research students, that chapter 4 should reflect their research questions. They should highlight exactly how they solved the problems for their research questions and their contribution. This should be clear when writing their chapter 4, because
Thank
at the end of chapter 4 and during the viva, the examiners would like to see how the student has solved the problem that was described in chapter 1.
Yes, yes. Thank you. It is a reminder. I spoke also on the similar line. Uh, Thank you. Any other question, Sister Jainab? Are you
Hello,
there?
Prof.
Yes, Fred.
All right. So let me take my question. Let's
Sure.
assume you distribute, let's say, 200 questions. And then out of the 200, let's say 150 came out. In after the 150, maybe let's say 10 were not usable. So you managed to get, let's say, 140. Now, when you are calculating the response rate, are you going to use the 140 or you are going to use the 150?
No, it's definitely you have to go back to your chapter 3. You refer to Umar Sakaran or Christian Morgan table, or you refer to any uh, techniques that help you to determine the minimum sample size. So if your minimum sample size is 200, you cannot use 140 and complete your study. Definitely is unacceptable. So it doesn't matter how many you have distributed, how many collected. You have to make sure in the data analysis time you have minimum number of responses available for you. Okay. So if the
My
minimum number
question,
is, yes.
my question has to do with the response rate.
Okay, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because response rate differs from country to country, from industry to industry, depending on the kind of problem that you have. If your unit of analysis is customer, individual, easy to get the data. If your unit of analysis are managers, top leadership of organization, then response rate would be poorer, right? So it doesn't matter what kind of response rate you get, but you have to make sure you achieve minimum number of sample size for data analysis. Okay.
All right, sir. Thank you so very much.
Prof, Prof, I want to
Yes.
know that the same question my brother Fred was asking. Uh, we consider the actual size of data, like my as per Morgan College, my sample size is 241, right? What about the oversized data that I
Okay.
already mentioned in chapter 3?
Over.
He also want to know about the oversized data, and I also want to know, and I'm still confused about the oversized data that we need to mention in chapter 4 or not.
Basically, when you talk about the minimum sample size required for a study, let's say, for example, you refer to Uma Sakaran, and your sample size, minimum sample size required is 384, say, for example. And then when you have collected the data, you distributed a lot, say 2000, and you managed to get 400. So you can use all 400. It doesn't matter if you have more than 384. 384 is the minimum, that is the requirement. If you use 400, 450, 500, no problem at all. Okay, Sister Nida. That's the problem that a student encountered, and he contacted me. He says his minimum data requirement is 384 based on Christian Morgan and Umar Sakaran. But he got about 410, and his supervisor said, reduce the number of data, drop some question, throw some question, keep only 384. So he called me, he said, which one is right? I said, look at the table. What did they say? They say this is the minimum number required. Minimum number, meaning what? You can have more. You cannot have less. Okay. So if you have mentioned chapter 3 that your minimum sample size requirement is 384 and chapter 4 you use 500, no problem at all. Okay, sister? Did I answer your question?
Yes, Prof. Thank you so much.
All right. All right. Sister Nasreen, any question from you? We are doing a qualitative study. Are you online, Sister Nasreen? You can unmute your microphone and speak. Not sure. Okay. How about Brother Naim? Any question from you?
Hello, sir. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, very clear.
Okay, sir. Sir, I have few questions, but very shortly I will ask you. Okay, my first question is for the thesis. Is it mandatory to show the theoretical framework and both the conceptual framework, or we can only mention the conceptual framework? So how could we?
In a thesis, you will never have both. If it's a qualitative study, we use conceptual framework. If it's a quantitative study, we use theoretical framework. We'll never have both in one thesis. Okay, you will have just one.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
For the
number one.
quantitative, okay, sir. For the quantitative research, my one. So can I only present the conceptual framework?
No, you will have the theoretical framework because qualitative study is basically the approach we use will be deductive. So you will use some established theory. Okay, from established theory, you take the variable dimension and you put it in the theoretical framework. So it is a theory-driven framework. That's how you call it theoretical framework. So it is not a conceptual framework. Conceptual framework is based on concept. So qualitative researcher will use that because they may not find established theory that can explain the problem in hand. And that's why they decided to go for qualitative. So in that case, they use concept. They use concept. They don't use theory, they use concept. The building blocks of a theory I have discussed many times in different time. You start with idea. After idea become concept. After that concept, it become construct. After construct, become hypothesis. After that, it become theory. So quantitative study start from theory, okay, it's much higher. But qualitative study start from zero. Therefore, they use the concept. That's why they draw a conceptual framework. Okay, so you may not have a conceptual framework for a qualitative study. It should be a theoretical framework for quantitative, okay?
Quantitative, okay. So the next question is, in the chapter 4, the data analysis for the quantitative research, should I use the Stata or Smart PLS? Which one will be better?
No, it depends on the kind of data you have. If you are doing panel data, if you're having panel data, then you have to go for Stata.
Oh, panel data.
So,
Okay.
say for example, economics data, you are using 15 years of economics data, 15 years of accounting finance data, you can use this data. But if you are distributing questionnaire, collecting data, you cannot use this data for that. Then you'll be using Smart PLS or SPSS or AMOS, okay?
Okay. Okay.
Prof,
Yes.
Okay, Prof.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yes, I can hear you. Yes.
okay. Prof, I want to know that while using the PLS 4 version 4, we still need to use SPSS for error removing.
That's something very interesting. Actually, you don't need SPSS. You can do it in Excel. You can key in the data in Excel, and from there you can export in PLS, and you can just run everything. Everything is there in PLS. It's just a matter of mastering the software. Okay. But personally, since I am very well versed with SPSS before I learned PLS, I rather what I do, I will key in the data in SPSS. The validity test, the factor analysis, I'll do it in SPSS, and then I do a reliability even in SPSS to make sure everything is said. Then only I convert the data to PLS. It becomes easier. Everything will come the way I want, okay? It is up to you how you would like to do it. But you can put it in Excel, and then you can export it to PLS, okay? Or you can import from Excel to PLS. Okay, Sister Nida?
Yes, Prof, got it.
All right. Charles, any question from you?
Yes, Prof. I was just asking that in chapter 4, we expect to hear the voice of the researcher, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
Now, at the same time, we are supposed to show connectivity of the
Yes.
research you have and previous research, similarities and differences. Now, what is it highly wanted between the voice of the researcher or to show the similarities and differences and the connectivity?
The
What do
voice
you?
of researcher is basically in the discussion section, which I will cover next week on chapter 5. The way I'm following, I'm not putting discussion in chapter 4. Discussion will be in chapter 5. In that case, your voice is more in chapter 5. Similarities, contrasting also more would be in chapter 5, there where you have the discussion section. But the way I'm presenting chapter 4, I'm keeping it into data analysis and findings. You're just presenting findings, so your voice is not that loud yet. You are
Okay.
highlighting the spatial findings, some kind of differences, highlighting, but you are not making your voice louder here.
All
You
right.
make your voice louder in chapter 5. That's what I'm going to do in the next week when I do a session on how to write chapter 5. Okay,
But then
Charles?
we can make references in chapter
Yes,
4.
yes. Chapter 4. When you do discussion, you have to refer back to literature.
Okay.
And you have to compare and contrast, and you have to highlight what is so special with you in your research. Okay.
All right.
All right. Jainab, Sister Jainab, are you there?
Thank you, Professor.
Okay. Oh, yes, yes. The Arubani. Yes.
Sir,
Anything?
thank you, sir, Prof, for this lecture. Assuming you are using a mixed method in your research, can you use both mViable and the SPSS together?
Sorry.
Assuming you are using your research is using both, mixed method
Okay.
of analysis. Mixed method of analysis. Can you use both mViable and the SPSS together in your analysis?
Can, because since you are using mixed approach, if mixed
Yes.
method approach is adopted, then what you will
Yes.
do is you will do qualitative first, then follow on with the quantitative, or do
Okay.
quantitative followed by qualitative. Or sometimes we do qualitative, then quantitative, then qualitative. So validation after validation. So in that case, definitely you can use more than one. No problem.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, let me look at the screen. Those of our participants ask question. Okay, I said that, Prof, is there any difference of chapter 4 in terms of pure science and social science? There are differences in terms of the way you present your findings, because social science, we have to talk about demographic profile of respondents, the response rate and all that. But pure science, you may not need that. Okay, so you are in the lab, you're working in the laboratory, and you have your own way, the protocol of doing things. So you describe based on the questions you have in chapter 1. Make sure it tallies the way you present. Okay, so you present your experiment in a logical manner, keeping in mind of the research question that you have in chapter 4. So you are going on thematic. Okay, so that will be the pure science. Social science I have explained. Okay, all right. How does a student report his or her Art 2 in analysis of chapter 4? What is Art 2? I do not really understand what you mean by Art 2. R2. Oh, R square, is it? R square, possibly R square. Okay. How does the student report his or her R square? Remember, R square is what? R square is the explainability of the model. This is the power. It shows the power of your frame, the framework that you have developed. If your R square is 50%, it means the variable that you have extracted can explain 50% of the dependent variable, the problem. 50% problem can be explained by those variables. If it's 70%, then it can explain 70%. If it's 20%, then your framework captured only 20%, meaning 80% of the factors that contribute to the problem has not been captured in your study. How good is the study? Is it acceptable? It depends on the area of research. In finance, I have seen paper in Journal of Finance, #1 finance journal in the world, R square is only 4%. Okay, so it depends which kind of study you do, and that's where you have to refer to the previous studies. In previous studies, everyone found R square to be 60-70%, then there's no reason you should have less than that. If it is less than that, you have to find possible explanation why that happened. Okay, all right. Lina, if I'm doing qualitative research, what is the difference between conceptual framework in chapter 4, chapter 2, and chapter 4? Chapter 2, at the end, you have the conceptual framework. In conceptual framework, you have all those sub-themes are there. So when you are going for chapter 4, you present based on those sub-themes. Thematic presentation, that's what you want in chapter 4 for qualitative research. So you are going by research question, but research questions, each question will be answered by one of the sub-theme, okay? So you go in that way, all right? So just chapter 4. In discussion of findings, do we discuss using literature? Not really. It depends. If you are doing discussion and findings together, you have to refer back to the previous literature, okay? But I said I am in the first group of the first school of thought. Data presentation and findings. Discussion is in chapter 4, chapter 5. But if your university guideline says you should have discussion in chapter 4, then you have to refer back to literature, okay? The majority of my informants are male. The number of women I can interview is few. Do I need to explain? Definitely have to explain. Why? Why you say majority of your informant are male? Why? Some kind of data has to be presented. Say, for example, the research problem that you have, males are affected compared to the female. Male are affected more than the female. So definitely you can have more male than the female. So that kind of interpretation, some kind of acceptable interpretation must be there. All right. Why male are more or female are more? All right. Say, for example, if you are doing a research on sexual harassment, of course, the participant will be more female than male. Okay. So it depends on what kind of study you do. Okay. Do I have to include all transcribed interviews in the thesis or just a few important ones? It's not necessary to describe everyone. Important one, highlighting, the elaboration. So you have to only highlight, or you have to explain only those are the important ones, not the whole everything. Okay, from the interview, the transcript that you have. So far, for qualitative research, we should only have conceptual framework radius. For qualitative research, definitely you don't have theoretical framework. Sometimes you may have theoretical support, but still it is a conceptual framework. Okay, and you may not have hypothesis. I understand, when I chair certain sessions, I see qualitative students are presenting, and I see some examiners, they are talking about, arguing that, no, you must have hypothesis. So I do not want to make any conclusion on it. For my personal understanding, you will end up your qualitative research by proposing some hypothesis. And that's where quantitative researcher will take on and will continue doing the research. So personally, I feel that you should not have hypothesis in qualitative research, okay? So you have a conceptual framework, okay? So you just have conceptual framework, Kiran Kaur, okay? Okay, Noora, if my respondents are 3 in each of the firm highlighted in my chapter 3, and I have 104 firms, would the total be 312 or 104? Definitely 312, right? Because from each company, you are taking 3. 3 respondents from each company. So the total become 312. It's not 104. Definitely not, okay? We remain thankful. Okay. Thank Rob for elucidated explanation how to write chapter 4, which has to do with analysis. Okay, no, nothing. Rob, can you talk briefly about Brown and Clark thematic analysis? How do we go about coding manually? Okay. Early years matters. I am a quantitative researcher. Okay, so my understanding of qualitative research is not that deeper. So to talk about Brown and Clark, definitely I'm not the right person to explain. Okay, I'm sorry for that. I do not want to misinterpret and give you wrong information. So I'm not a qualitative guy. So I will leave that question. We better contact somebody, talk to somebody who is specialized in qualitative research. Okay. All right. So those questions I have in the chat box. So now I come back to the people on stage. So final round. Do you have any other questions before I end up the session for today? For tonight?
Prof,
Anyone?
can I ask one more question?
Sure. Sure.
Okay, Prof. Actually, I'm not that much actually experienced in the data analysis still now. I'm only working on chapter 1 to 3. But I have one thing in my mind. Actually, I want to know in advance. Suppose if I have 5 or 6 in IV, and then my one DV, and one moderator and one mediator. So now I want to know, so in the data analysis interpretation, so what actually the analysis mandatory I have to run? Suppose the factor analysis or the the correlation matrix to analyze the variables. So what is actually suggestion? Because in chapter 4 you just give us an outline, right? So can you just give me a shortly just what analysis we have to do and what is the mandatory
No, it depends
general
on
analysis?
yes, it depends on which software you are using. If you are using
Smart
SPSS, then
PLS,
definitely you
smart
start
PLS.
with yeah. If you are going for Smart PLS, it has protocols of doing it. Okay, Smart
Okay,
PLS is developed in a way, the software. That's how we call it smart. SPSS, if you have to run mediating, moderating, is quite tough. Because you have to write stepwise hierarchy, regression, and all that. But Smart PLS, you can run all that together. So it's not a problem at all. What you have to do is learn the software. Then you will find it easy. Okay. I don't have to tell you exactly what you have to do. If you learn the software, you will know exactly what you have to do. Okay. If you do not learn the software, if I tell you now, you won't understand me. Okay.
okay, Prof. Yeah.
Okay. I
Okay,
see on the
so
screen.
so
Yes. Sorry.
So in the software, once I run the software, I can see what the actual option is there, right?
Yes.
So
Yes. Yes. If you understand the software, you will know
mhm.
exactly what needs to be done. Okay.
Okay, Prof. Yeah.
Okay.
But is there
Uh,
any mandatory? Is there any mandatory?
Definitely, there
The
are mandatory tests are there. The mandatory tests are there. Those are, I said, you learn the software, then you will know what are the one compulsory you must run. Okay, so that
Okay.
one you will understand through learning the software.
Okay, Prof. Thank you very much.
Welcome. Donia Karba in the chat box, you say what rule or formulas we follow is specify minimum sample size for quality research. Quality research as minimum as 3. It could be as maximum as 30. There are many citations there. Uh, I cannot refer at this moment. I'm not a qualitative guy, remember, as I said. But you can even complete PhD with just 3 interviews, in-depth interview, personal interview. That's 3 I've seen. As low as 3, as more as 30. That's the sample size that we see usually in the qualitative research. Okay. What are the formulas of quantitative research minimum sample? There are so many. There's so many. Easiest one would be Uma Sakaran sample determination table, and the other one is Krishy and Morgan, that table. And then the latest one, if you're using Smart PLS, we prefer you to use G power. G power. If you want to learn how to use G power, then you should go to YouTube, how to use G power. There are a lot of videos available. Learn it. Okay. Onglina, when I write discussion section, I have to write implication. As far as I know, they are practical. Okay, this one, I'll leave it for next week. Okay, Onglina. Next week, next Saturday or Sunday, I will be doing another live session, inshallah, on how to write chapter 5. That's where I'll be talking about discussion, implications, contributions, conclusions, all those affairs should be covered in the next week. Next week one will be important in the sense, those of you will attend the next week session will get the certificate. It's certificate for like all 5 sessions, okay? So I did not give any certificate for chapter 1, 2, 3, 4. Today also no certificate, but if you attend 5, I will give you certificate as if you have attended all 5, okay? So next week you have to attend, and then I'll explain chapter 5. It's the most important one, and that's why I plan to give you the certificate like that, okay? Olina, you have another question. When we are doing qualitative research, we need to critically interpret our findings, chapter 4 or chapter 5. Chapter 4, you are just, if you're following my way, then you are just presenting the findings. You are not critical here that much. Critical would be in chapter 4 when you do the discussion. Or if you would like to do findings, present findings at the same time you do discussion chapter 4, then you got to be critical. Okay? Saidu Mansur Adam. Okay. What should a researcher do in the presence of 2 or more different research tools that measure same construct as used by different prior researchers? No, all right. When you refer to different previous researchers, they may use different tools. It doesn't matter, you know. As long as you have reference that someone have used it before, you can continue with that. So say, for example, if you are doing now research in marketing management, most of you will use Smart PLS. But in your specific area, if you see that previous research, they all use SPSS, and you want to continue SPSS, there's no harm. Huh? It's not compulsory you must use Smart PLS. You can still use SPSS provided you run appropriate tests and you do, you know, appropriate tests and you prove that you have the solutions to the problem that you have defined in chapter 1. Okay. The population is 8,000 farm. What would be the minimum purposive sample? If you have 8,000, please refer to Masakaran table. You don't really memorize all that information, right? Please refer to it. Just go to Google, type Sakaran sampling determination, sample size determination table. Sakaran is there. You just look at the table. They say this number of total population, this should be the minimum sample size. Christian Morgan has similar table. Okay. So please refer to that table. We do not memorize exactly. We can't remember all those information. Okay, you have to refer to that table. All right. So, any last question from anyone? Those of you are with me on the screen. Anyone? The last question. No. Huh? So, if no question, then thank you very much for joining me tonight.
Prof, I have one question. Can you give us the chapter 4 slides as well? Will we get?
No, I said I will give you the slide. I will share in my YouTube channel. Sorry, not YouTube channel, in my WhatsApp groups. If you're connected with me in my WhatsApp group, it will be there. And
sure.
It will be also in the YouTube channel, but I cannot promise when. I'm quite a busy person, so I have to find time.
Yeah.
Then I can put a link just below the YouTube video in YouTube channel. I'll put it there, but I have to find some time. And I'm sorry I couldn't give the e-cert for the Smart PLS second session because my daughter is having exam now. Certificate is handled by my daughter, so she is attending exam. Once she finishes the exam, she'll do it. But meanwhile, she has already learned auto generated certificate. She has already learned that. So from next session, when you fill in the form, immediately you receive the certificate. Okay, she has already learned that software, so you don't have to wait anymore. All right. So next session would be important in the sense that chapter 5 is the chapter that actually gives you the PhD, and you have to write that way. So make sure you do not miss next week's session. And also next week's session, those of you attend, I will give you a form during the session towards the end. If you manage to fill up that form, then you will be given a certificate as if like you have attended all 5 sessions. That's the way the certificate will be given. Okay. So then
thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof.
Welcome. So stay safe, healthy, and keep praying for me. And see you when I see you. Hopefully by
Inshallah. See you.
Okay, next Saturday. All right. So assalamu alaikum and all the best. So
thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.